Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 2, Episode 33. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Once again, I was wrong. Unions, market economics, and the crooked-ass, greedy railway industry. Those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it, the Vladimir Putin chapter. And yes, dear listener, every prayer is always answered. Thank you all for your continued support. Please like, thumbs up, write a review, 5-star, subscribe, whatever the hell they do on the different platforms. And off we go.
Act 1. Once again, I was wrong. Unions and greedy-ass choo-choo train owners.
I'd like to start this segment out the way I've started out many segments. Once again, I am wrong. Be patient with me, dear listener. Follow along. It will all make sense. I'm a markets guy. I've said it before on this podcast. I'll say it again. I believe in markets. I also believe that the market forces are operating all of the time. Regardless, the invisible hand is an actual phenomenon. Even in the communist Soviet Union, communist China, markets are still operating. They're being manipulated by the government, but they're still operating. And in fact, that's the reason why those countries are often terrible, bleak places to live. We have this notion in this country that we're operating in a free market system, which is simply untrue. Although not a communist system, not an economic system where the state decides everything, we're in a system where the government chooses winners and losers. One of the winners that the government has chosen is the rail industry. That's right, the railroads. An industry that we've been led to believe by way of the media, by way of the public relations by the rail system itself, it's basically teetering on the brink of extinction. It's teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Railways are in crisis. They need immediate investment, public investment. They need immediate expansion through public investment. Rail companies got a big pot of cash during the COVID crisis because we needed to keep the railroads running and we needed to keep the rail workers employed. Just like the airlines, the railroads promised they were going to use the money to help keep all of their staff so that when the COVID crisis abated, the railways, the railroads, the rail cars could operate at their normal efficiency. And just like the airlines, the railroads fired a bunch of people. Severances, early retirement, cut their workforce by 40,000 people. 40,000 people during COVID. The airlines got some attention because of what they did, the amount of money that they were given during the COVID pandemic, and the way that they weaned down their staff. The railroads never got any attention. Well, until now. The Rail Workers Union is ready to strike over years of being mistreated, in their words, by these rail companies, by management. By nature, I am like you, dear listener. I'm not a fan of unions. As a fan of markets, it is somewhat antithetical to be a proponent of unions, although unions are a necessary part of the market. In my limited, feeble mind, I felt like unions had been relegated to the place that they deserve to be over the course of the last 20 years. But more than any history book could illustrate, unions are not only a necessary part of the market, they're the only thing in the market that is going to provide leverage to the working man. The government is not going to help. Business itself is not going to do the right thing. In the midst of a supply chain crisis, which is contributing heavily to the inflation, which is threatening the economy, which has the Federal Reserve raising interest rates at a record rate, not only have these major rail carriers, which have a monopoly on the rail system in this country, not only have they laid off a ludicrous number of employees. Over the course of the past 12 years, the rail companies have paid out stock dividends and have actually bought back stock to the tune of $196 billion. That's almost $200 billion from an industry that is routinely made out to be in the media, made out to be by way of its own public relations, broke, teetering on bankruptcy, the entire infrastructure ready to collapse. One of the hallmarks of the Build Back Better plan, which, by the way, again, I think I've said it before, I'll say it again, fucking stupid name. Fucking stupid. One of the hallmarks of the Build Back Better plan, infrastructure. For what? Airports? Yes. Bridges? Yes. Railroads. The rail system? Yes. The rail system does not need any input from the government, not by way of money, not by way of interjection into this labor dispute. When you have at your disposal over the course of a decade close to $200 billion, you do not need any contribution in any way, shape, or form from the government. This to me is akin to communism. When you have an industry that has a monopoly by one or two players and is completely manipulating the government, it's not communism, but it's akin to communism. It's communism's brother. It's fascism. This is what fascism looks like. It isn't the black shirts in Italy. It's not the brown shirts in Germany. That is part of our popular culture lexicon. But the reality of fascism is business runs government. When you have a government that's completely beholden to an industry, such that not only does that industry pay out record profits over the course of the last 10 years, that industry at the same time to the public, to its own workers, is pleading poverty and is an advocate, proponent for a government infrastructure plan that's going to inject billions of dollars in money to rebuild rail lines, to build new rail lines, new rail cars. In a market economy where we are led to believe that all of these actors are operating in a free market, these companies would take those profits and reinvest them into their businesses, reinvest them into their infrastructure, reinvest them into their employees. When you can count on the government to do all of those things, the government will help you maintain the monopoly. The government will bail you out when you need new money, fresh capital to rebuild infrastructure. The government will, by way of the laws that have been enacted with regard to unions for such a vital industry as the railroads, hell, the government will actually break a strike and make workers come back to work. The rail workers don't get vacation anymore. The pool of employees is so small, they can't have a day off. They have to work every single day. These massive trains with all of these rail cars, you can look this up on Google. It pops up immediately. The railroads are advocating that only one or two people populate those massive trains. They feel like it's perfectly safe to have one or two engineers on those 2, 3 mile long trains. The union thought it was unsafe to have only 5 people operating these massive trains, and they can't even keep it at 5. As much as I have, throughout the course of my life, thought ill of unions, decried unions, the only way all of these facts would have come to light is if the unions actually mobilized. They threatened a strike, and they started publicizing these facts. The media hasn't covered this at all. I don't think many people in this country, I know I didn't. Maybe I shouldn't generalize. Maybe I shouldn't make any assumptions about what anybody else knew specific to trains, the railway industry. I had no idea that the entire industry was so flush with cash. I had no idea that instead of using that money to build what is a dilapidated railway infrastructure in this country, they were just paying it out as dividends and stock buybacks. I had no idea the extent to which that industry had been laying off all of its employees, such that it's, I think, below 100,000 total railway workers in this country right now. I had no idea that in that stupid Build Back Better plan that our taxpayer dollars would be bailing out these railway companies for failing to take any of the money that they'd been making in these record profits over the course of the last 10 years and reinvesting it into the infrastructure of the railway system. In yet another illustration of how my thinking has changed, of how the facts have illuminated to me something that I thought I knew, something that I was sure that I had a firm grasp on, that all of my belief systems, my assumptions were accurate, were in accord with the truth. Wrong. Wrong again. I can't say that this is going to turn me on to unions, that I think that unions are great, but clearly they are a necessary, if not vital part of the American free marketplace, because you can't trust the industries and you certainly can't trust the government. As I've said over and over again, there is no difference between the Republican and the Democrat. There is no difference in the political parties in this country. Biden's infrastructure plan is really no different than Trump's tax plan. Both of them gave billions and billions of dollars to different industries. They're doing it in different ways, but it's a handout. It's the government picking winners. And in this case, it's the government picking a winner that we were led to believe actually needed the money, actually was in dire straits, and that influx of cash was going to help a vital, a fundamental part of the U.S. economy, of the supply chain. As it were, it's just a bailout so that the people who own the stock, the people who own the companies, can actually continue to pay out the dividends, can continue to do the stock buybacks, and can have our taxpayer dollars pay for all of the investment that they should have used that money for. And as I said in the segment that I did about abortion, how Democrats have been using that issue for decades to bilk their faithful, to bilk their own supporters, their own voters out of billions and billions of dollars, using it as a bugaboo to get more money than doing nothing about it. Look at this issue and look at what the Democrats have argued they support over the course of the last 20 years. They support workers, right? The Republicans support workers. The Democrats support workers. Biden said that he was going to be a president that wasn't going to allow big business to push around the working class anymore. Are you telling me that that man didn't know that the railway industry had made record profits over the course of the last 10 years, hadn't invested a dime of it into its own infrastructure, and that his infrastructure plan was going to be bailing them out for failing to do anything consistent with what management should be doing to operate what is a business in the free market system? Now he's got his balls in a sling. What's he going to do? If the union decides to strike, is he going to break the strike? And if he does, what leverage does he have in breaking that strike to try to get the workers a better deal? Now, I hear some of you, dear listeners, and you're saying right now, well, wait a minute. They've already come to a deal. The president got involved, the administration got involved, and the railway workers and management, they reached a deal. As is routine with most issues in our modern society, the media has done a terrible job at covering the aftermath of this so-called deal. Most of the workers weren't aware of what the terms of the deal were, and when pressed, it turns out that not even the media, no one knows what's in this deal. The media can't effectively report on it. Last guy to know, remember, I don't have the social medias, or to the extent that I do to promote this podcast, I never really participate. Even I saw the tweets where many of the railway workers were coming out after finding out some of the terms of the deal. They get one vacation day. That's the compromise. That's the deal that was struck. They go from 0 vacation days to 1. Which one of you, dear listeners, is going and working in any job where they tell you, by way of compromise, by way of having this industry nearly shut down through a strike, we've come to an agreement and you get 1 vacation day? Not one of you would take that job. Not one of you would take that job no matter the money. If you have to work weekends and you don't get any real sick time and you get 1 vacation day, if you are looking at that job, you pass. If you are working that job, you quit. The crisis has not been averted. A strike is very well likely if this is accurate, if this type of bullshit is consistent throughout the terms of this quote-unquote deal. There is no room in our economy for a labor strike in the railway industry. That is the backbone of so much of how goods are transported in this country. There can't be a strike for a day, a week, without it costing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. With the economy teetering on the precipice of a recession, this would be the nail in that coffin. Politicians just aren't smart. They're not that smart. Biden got himself backed into a corner in another industry, just like the airlines, with all the problems they experienced over the summer, that the government had bailed out, and the government didn't hold accountable when all of the problems that laying off workers, that neglecting to use any of the profits over the last few years, reinvesting into those businesses, reinvesting into the infrastructure, all of those problems that it's created, now it's coming to a head. And what latitude do you have? You have to go back and tell the workers, look, you're going to have to work every day for the rest of the year, the rest of the next couple of years, without a vacation, just so the economy doesn't fall off the precipice. And American taxpayer, you're going to pay for the infrastructure for these railways so that they can actually operate at their peak, at their maximum efficiency, in order to keep the economy humming along to the extent that it can, to avoid any other supply chain issues. All the while the rail companies, well, they have a monopoly. They can pay out dividends. They can engage in stock buybacks to the extent that they want, and we're not going to do anything about it. For fuck's sake, you've got the NFL and Major League Baseball in front of Congress every, 5 to 7 years over some issue based on the way that they manage those businesses, and you don't have any substantive investigation into how the rail system in this country, which again, and I believe that my understanding, my beliefs are consistent with yours, dear listener, that the rail system in this country was on the precipice of breaking, of going the way of the dodo. They're flush with cash. They're making as much money as they probably ever have in the history of the rail system in this country. And that's saying something, because the railways used to be the money-making industry in this country. One final note. It turns out that Amtrak is owned by Warren Buffett, his firm, Berkshire Hathaway. And Warren Buffett gets a lot of credit about being such a smart and savvy investor. And he really is. He reminds me of Mike Ashley. Mike Ashley, you might recall, who I have complained about on this podcast numerous times, the former owner of Newcastle United. People complained all the time about Mike Ashley in his ownership of Newcastle United, and it was because he was a cheap bastard. He skimped on everything in order to maximize the profit of that club, regardless of the success on the pitch. Routinely, one of the poorest performing clubs in the Premier League, it was routinely one of the most profitable. As this has turned into now a 19-minute screed, tangent, maybe even a rant, Warren Buffett is just an investor. We lionize so many people in our capitalist marketplace like they're geniuses. And all they're doing is the same thing that any of the tycoons, that any of the barons of industry in this country did 150 years ago. 11-year-olds losing fingers in the shop? It's okay. 200 women in a basement churning out dresses? It's okay. It's simply squeezing the most that you can out of your workforce while trying to find an alternate source of money, the government, so that you don't have to take any of those massive profits and reinvest it into your business. On its face, it looks terrible. On a ledger, it is brilliant. If you own any railway stock, you are a very happy person. If you are a railway worker, or for that matter, after this, again, stupidly titled Build Back Better plan, an American taxpayer, you feel like a fucking chump. There is no free marketplace. The government is choosing winners and losers all the time. In this circumstance, the railways are the winners and all of us are the losers.
Act 2. Those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. The Vladimir Putin chapter.
Those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. That is a well-known, often cited phrase from a philosopher named George Santayana. On this very podcast, I noted that one Vladimir Putin coyly and slyly made reference after he had invaded Ukraine to the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and that justifications, well, those things are fluid. And regardless of whether or not they're accurate in their foundation, in the alleged circumstances warranting such action, once that die is cast, you're all in. Comically, how did that work out for the United States of America? Certainly the U.S. was able to go into Iraq, destroy the Iraqi army, depose Saddam Hussein, yet within a couple of years, there was an insurgency that the media completely overlooked. It was really kept from the American public until it literally blew up in the U.S.'s face. The complete and total incompetence of the so-called occupation led to the creation of ISIS. Never resolved any dispute between the Sunni and Shia and Kurdish populations within that country, so that when the United States inevitably left, the quote-unquote army that was empowered to protect the country completely fell to ISIS. Had the Bush administration not lied about the underlying foundation as to why we were invading Iraq, perhaps the American people would have been more supportive of the U.S. military staying there longer to better resolve some of the complications within Iraqi society. But when you come up with a bullshit rationale for doing something as drastic as invading another nation, you damn well better have everything planned perfectly. Everything must go perfectly. And that way you can actually get in and get out without the public ever turning on you. How often has that happened in the course of human history? I, being a history dork, reading about accounts of different military endeavors over the course of human history, I can't think of one. I can't think of a single incident where there was a bullshit foundation for going in and starting a war where the nation or the power that started that war was able to get in, achieve its military objective, and then get out without the public ever becoming that incensed by it. Cue sly old Vladimir Putin, coy old Vladimir Putin, and his comment about the U.S. justification for the Iraq war and the fact that everything is falling apart in Ukraine. The Russians are going to have their own surge. Do you remember the surge, dear listener, when George W. Bush came out and said, look, I know things are going terribly, and the entire foundation of us being in Iraq is total bullshit. But instead of leaving What we're going to do is we're going to send more troops into Iraq in order to stabilize the situation, which was actually successful, dear listener. It actually worked to quell the insurgency. Now, it didn't deal with any long-term issue, because when would the U.S. be able to leave if it needed that many troops on the ground to quell an insurgency? That question was never answered, and of course, it never did get answered. But in the short term, there was success. Vladimir Putin is now calling for an additional 300,000 troops to be sent into Ukraine. And it isn't like the United States military. These are consignment troops. For all intents and purposes, it's a draft. Consignment is just a fancy word for we're going to have a draft. We're going to draft 300,000 people into the military. We're going to give them probably 4 to 6 weeks of training, and then they're going to the front. And unlike a U.S. draft, where it was allegedly random, and we know that's not really the case because there were many an exemption that the wealthy were able to take advantage of, it's even worse in Russia. They don't even flirt with drafting people from certain levels of society. Generally, this quote-unquote consignment, this draft, is of the poor in the eastern part of the country. Why now? Yes, Russia has suffered some military defeats. If you understand anything about the geography of that area and what's coming, when winter comes in Ukraine, in Western Russia, it gets cold. Ask Napoleon and the French. Ask Hitler and the Nazis. It gets cold. Things stop. And if you want to slow down any type of invasion, if you want to slow down any type of counterattack, if you simply want to bolster your lines and you want to keep things static, you go, you input additional troops into that area during the wintertime, and everything will get bogged down. So think about that, dear listener. Think about it for a second as a Russian citizen. You know it's going to get cold. You know the history. You know that if you get drafted, you're going into a shit show, not only in a conflict that you don't believe in, but it's going to be in some of the worst conditions on the face of planet Earth. Naturally, the Russian people, even under an authoritarian dictator who kills people on the reg in order to demonstrate that he's still in control, they went out and protested. That's some balls right there. When you know that you're going out under an authoritarian regime that routinely kills people who dissent against that authoritarian power, and you protest. Putin, for his part, not to be undone by such disruptions, by such dissent, basically said, okay, arrest all these people who are protesting, and guess what? You're the first ones to be consigned. You're the first ones to be drafted in this new 300,000 troop surge. As it did in Iraq, I have no doubt that inserting another 300,000 troops into Ukraine is going to turn the tide of the war in favor of the Russians, even if it's just to hold the ground that they've already captured. Is it a long-term solution to the conflict? No, it is not. And if there's any positive to be gleaned from this happening, it's that it's going to further destabilize the authoritarian power of one Vladimir Putin. There are a number of theories as to why the Soviet Union collapsed. One of them is that because of the lies that the state was telling about the success and, in reality, failure of the Russian military's invasion of Afghanistan, people lost faith in everything that the state said. They lost faith in the entire potential of a communist state, that it could be a viable, a successful enterprise. Then, as it is now, the Russians are very guarded about their losses. The Soviet admitted toll for the Afghan war, 13,000 dead, 35,000 wounded. That's what the Soviets admitted they had suffered, the casualties they had suffered in the Afghan war. The people, on the other hand, called bullshit. Because as you can imagine, dear listener, you had grieving families all over the country, and when they looked at the statistics, they said, this can't be right. This can't actually be the number. Putin has claimed that there have been roughly 6,500 Russian soldiers killed in the invasion of Ukraine, where analysts from the U.S. say it could be anywhere between 15 and 20,000. Is the theory of the collapse of the Soviet Union that the lies told in Afghanistan led to the people revolting, is that accurate? I don't know. I'm sure there were a number of factors, one of them being communism doesn't work. I'm sure there were a number of factors that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. I only bring it up because those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. Putin has committed one of the worst political blunders one can make, and that is starting a war and then lying about the success or failure of that war, particularly when it comes to the casualties of the service members. There's so much propaganda in the media today about Putin being this sly and sophisticated actor, that he's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. And as I stated in an earlier episode of the podcast this season, I believe the man is simply afraid. I believe he is being driven by fear. Fearful people do not make rational decisions. Fearful people may get lucky that some of the things that they do end up indirectly benefiting them, but ultimately it's going to lead to their downfall, particularly in light of the fact that you're taking actions, one is taking actions that others have taken, and you have no frame of reference for how those actions actually played out over time. Those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it.
Act 3. Every prayer is always answered.
As I have stated numerous times on the podcast, I grew up in the Christian church. I was an enrollee in Catholic school for the first 7-8 years of my illustrious academic career. I have heard countless times, whether it be from a priest or whether it be from a nun, whether it be through some sort of scripture, hymn, parable, your prayers are answered, every one of them. God answers all of your prayers. As you might imagine, 12-year-old Patrick thought, that's the stupidest shit I've ever heard in my entire life. The reality is that all of your prayers are answered. And the issue is not whether or not your prayers are answered. It's whether or not you, dear listener, understand that A, you are praying, B, you are inviting it in, and C, when it arrives, you are allowing it. Now, most of us feel like a prayer has to be in some penitent position whereby we are declaring that we're going to start a prayer, we pray, and then we finish the prayer. That is a simple, basic way of looking at prayer, and it's the way that we've all been taught that that's how you do it. It's completely wrong. Every thought that you have with intention is a prayer. Many of the thoughts that you have where you get lost in that thought, where you didn't have the intention of beginning on the wave of that thought, but in the midst of you being in that wave, you feed it your energy. In fact, you feed it energy such that you might actually have the same thought over and over again with different outcomes. Many of them, of course, negative. That, dear listener, is in fact a prayer. That is how this whole thing works. That is how the universe operates. That is what it is to commune with God. Through your imagination, through this process of thought that we as human beings uniquely have on this plane of existence, in this dimension, on this planet, we have thoughts, many of them unintentional, some of them intentional. These are, in fact, prayers. Then what do? You're actually inviting these things into your life. When you see the things that you believe to be the truth, you are inviting these things into your life. Now, what do I mean to say when it's believing it's the truth? Generally, as I've talked about on the podcast, You have assumptions. I have assumptions about the way the world actually works. We see this person, they're a nice person. They're a not nice person. They are a good person. They are a bad person. We evaluate circumstances based on assumptions. We also evaluate people and circumstances based on expectations. We focus our energy on these assumptions. We focus these energies on our expectations. We are inviting in the things that we expect. We are assuming things, and then when we see confirmation out in the world of those assumptions, we're inviting that into our lives. Having said that, you'd think that this was somehow a positive and inspiring approach to how we live our lives. Of course, that's not the truth. That's not the reality. Very often, because we're so wrapped up in our thoughts, we're so wrapped up in thoughts that frankly we're not controlling, that are not intentional. The assumptions, the expectations, these are negative things. The confirmation is coming in. I knew this was going to turn out poorly. Look at all the things that I have now seen in my scope, in my sphere, to confirm this to be the truth. That provides the window, the door is probably a better way to say it, because it's more like a barn door than it is a window, to allowing in these things that you've prayed for. I really hope this doesn't happen. I know this is going to turn out poorly. This is a prayer. You begin to see the things that confirm it's going to turn out poorly, and then you allow that's what's going to happen. There is no positive and negative, but for how we see things. I've referenced it before. It's Shakespeare. It's Hamlet. Act 2, Scene 2. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Your prayer is often an unintentional prayer for things to happen that you don't want. You begin to confirm as much, then you allow it into your existence. You have manifested all of those things that came out, the secret, the source. Manifest your destiny. Bring into your life what you want. All the money, all the prosperity. It's all true. Generally, we don't do that. That's not what we're spending our time and energy doing. We are allowing our thoughts to be the controller instead of that which is controlled. Some of you out there might be getting bold, saying, hey, you don't know me. You don't know the things that have happened in my life, the tragedies. You don't understand. I've got a receipt from McDonald's and Walmart in my pocket, and I've watched every iteration of Law and Order and NCIS. I know what's going on in my life. Wrong answer. It is folly to think that you're going to go throughout your life without facing any hardship. It is your perception of that quote-unquote hardship that is the issue. If you want to allow into your existence all the things that you truly want, all the positive things that you truly want, first and foremost, you have to pray for it. And that prayer is not you simply saying, Dear God, give me things. It's having the will to have intentional thoughts about the things that you want, the things that you desire, and then having the will, the intention to go out and identify all of the things that support you receiving. That is how you allow. That is how you allow the universe to provide you this bounty that you intentionally, that you willfully manifested. How? Through the power of your imagination, the power of your own thoughts. I can couple this with the pieces that I did on how we've never been lied to, how we are always manifesting, and if we go into a situation with these terrible, false assumptions and expectations, usually part of unintentional thought, or where we have been lackadaisical in recognizing and being aware, allowed our thoughts to run amok, you're creating this space to allow that thing to come in your life, even though ultimately it's negative. You actually prayed for it. You saw all of the things out in the universe to confirm, to support, to convince you that you were right, and then you allowed it into your life. And when it all falls apart, I was deceived. I was lied to. An interesting element of the human condition is that no one else will ever really know your thoughts and your feelings. Only you are the barometer of those things. And no one else can go back, can look at the history of you through your thoughts, and like it were a timeline, identify when you started to think about something, when it started to present, when you allowed it. Were you thinking intentionally? Were you thinking unintentionally? Were you lost in thought? Were you thinking about the worst possible outcome? Were you thinking about 10, 100, 1,000 worst possible outcomes? Did you not recognize, were you not aware that that is in fact a prayer to the universe? Did you not see things that started to confirm that bias? And then did you not allow it into your life? You could have never convinced me even a year ago that I'd be recording and publishing a piece like this, acknowledging that a lot of the manifestation stuff that came out, particularly about 15 years ago, that was very popular with the female population. I think the secret was the advent of this, where you can manifest everything that you want. The true key, what it failed to provide, was that you're doing it all the time anyway. That if you don't have conscious, intentional, willful thoughts and are trying to stay in a vibration of positivity, you are praying for negativity. Better said, the default setting of the human being is to pray for negativity. It is our imagination. It is that unique feature that allows us to do what no other animal on this planet can do, and that's actually manifest positivity. Stop praying for negativity, stop confirming negativity in your biases, and stop allowing it into your life. Once you realize as much, you accept that no one is a victim, that we all are extremely powerful. No one can take that power from us, because even though no one can go through and see what we thought, what our imagination was, in like kind, no one can control your imagination. At any given point, you can always change your mind. You can always imagine the better outcome. You can create a prayer of positivity. You can look for the things to confirm that bias, and then you can allow it into your life. One final thought on allowing, from my own experience, when you put all of your time and energy, this imagination, this thought, into manifesting something, it is so easy to put also this construct about what it will look like when it actually presents. And that is, again, a product of assumption, a product of expectation, a product of bias. So when that thing presents that you've been trying to manifest, you'll actually reject it because it doesn't look like what you think it should look like. Yes, I have made reference to this before in other segments of the podcast, that allowing is a very interesting and intricate principle, because we have to have a level of trust when it comes to allowing, that we don't necessarily know what that thing will look like, what the thing that's actually coming to us, that we're manifesting, is. A great example is dating. It's actually manifesting the perfect person for you. And you have an idea about what that person looks like, what kind of person they are, the characteristics. And certainly it is good to have discriminating tastes, to say, I know what I want, I know what I'm looking for. But if the ultimate goal about finding a potential mate is to be happy and to have that person help fulfill your life, very often the characteristics that we're so concerned with are irrelevant. Another great example, I want to manifest some kind of great career opportunity or some money-making opportunity, and then things come into your life and you look at it and you say, that's not for me. I can't see myself in that type of opportunity. It's too low for me. It's a step backwards. I do like to make reference of the ironies when I see them, and here is a great irony, that our default setting is to manifest negatively, to have thoughts, to have uncontrolled imagination, whereby the worst case scenario is often fixated upon, and then it actually manifests. We have no problem accepting that. We have no problem allowing that into our life, whereby when we manifest something that's positive, we often put so many parameters on it that when it presents, we say, no, that's not what I actually imagined. That's not what this should look like. To get something we don't want, we immediately accept it, very often without any resistance. To get something that we really do want, well, we have to put all the labels and the constructs and the parameters on it so that it looks exactly like what we want when we want it. Otherwise, we reject it. Can we have faith, dear listener? Can we trust that the universe is going to provide to us what is best suited for us versus what we think we should get? Can we control our imagination? Can we actually manifest through positive, willful, intentional thought? I challenge you, dear listener, to do as much as I've challenged myself, because the alternative is quite simple. You're going to do it anyway. You're either going to do it positively or negatively. Which one will you choose? This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.